snow-devoured sound as tactical boots sank thigh-deep, and the cabin materialized like a wrecked ship iced to the ridge. Rex pulled against the lead, a living compass dragging Deputy Ethan Cole through needles of frozen wind. Floods stayed dark, the storm did the masking. Heartbeats counted louder than radios. A single bulb bled through floorboards, promising either proof or a tomb. Holbrook's team fanned like shadows. Lauren Carter touched the evidence pouch at her chest, a reminder that paper and courage weigh the same when the door gives. The handle ripped, wood screamed, and the hallway exhaled diesel and damp wood. Somewhere below, chains kissed metal. Somewhere closer, a breath trembled behind a mask. Rex surged, a streak of sable and purpose, and Cole followed into a corridor that narrowed like a throat. Tonight would save someone, or end them, and the snow would hide everything either way. The shotgun lifted, bored eyes behind knit wool calculating panic. But Rex hit first, collapsing angles and stealing aim. Pellets chewed pine and found nothing living. Cole felt the wall hammer his shoulder, tasted plaster, and counted both miracles and debts in the same swallow. Lauren's stance stayed steady without ceremony. Cuffs snicked, steel told a different story than bravado. The basement door sulked behind a padlock pitted by rust, a minor obstacle in a night of major reckonings. Breach tools argued with iron and won, and breathless cold slid down the stairwell as if the earth itself inhaled. On the landing, Cole's gloved hand found new tremors not his own. They crawled through the wood from things tied too long to beams. The first face lifted, young and starving for names. The second shadow was older, thinner, and wore Eli's bone structure like a weathered photograph.
No oath could outrun scent. Rex abandoned command to choose love, threading through blankets and chains with a whine that sounded like a memory coming home. The thin man's eyes watered from more than the cold, and shoulders that had folded inward for years unlearned the pose. Michael Parker's name didn't need spoken. It hung in the room the moment Rex trembled, tail low, forepaws planted near a rusted cuff. Lauren's blade sheared plastic ties from teenagers first, triage decided by fear's age. Cole measured pulse, counted ribs, and mapped bruises like a cartographer reading a war. Above them, wind gnawed the eaves. Behind them, a hallway kept its secrets poorly. Extraction plans were dead reckoning through white noise and thin oxygen. Tonight's miracle wasn't a headline. It was a dog refusing to leave a man who smelled like a boy's safest memory and a life stolen mid-sentence. Hours earlier, a message stitched itself into the night, 5 words heavy as a gavel. He's alive. Basement. Trust no one. The number dissolved after sending, a phantom with perfect timing. Cole disliked magic he couldn't audit, but the clock was a hunter, and predators loved delay. The text turned an investigation into rescue math, and every decision since leaned toward risk. Lauren traced the phrasing with a social worker's ear, hearing a survivor's cadence, not a trap artist's swagger. Tommy Ray swore to new truck movements before dawn. Paperwork wanted daylight, absence wanted it more. The safe house felt temporary the way bridges feel temporary during fire. Cole drove with the lights off, learning again how darkness insists on either faith or surrender. In the rear view, the town shrank to a handful of stubborn lamps. In the snow-scored silence, the warning kept breathing like a second passenger.
The kettle's whistle never rose because Donna Brooks kept listening past it, the way dispatchers listen for breaths that don't belong. Eli's shoulders made a fortress around his heart. The leash wrapped his wrist, as if numbers on a phone could fail, but a dog could not. Tires whispered where roads ended, and Rex's growl started at the floor and climbed to the windows. 3 figures measured courage by the ounce and found it cheap. They brought tasers and crowbars where humanity would have done. The door held because winter had swollen it. The night held because a boy told a dog what fear tasted like. The SUV retreated, chewing ice, and relief did not feel safe, just postponed. Cole would arrive to rooms where adrenaline still clung to curtains, and the cocoa never cooled. Some storms end at the porch. This one learned a new route instead. Paper survives better than conscience. Lauren found the ledger sealed in plastic, half buried near propane where footprints lied about intentions. Names wore dates like expiration stamps, and grainy Polaroids tried to flatten children into inventory. Pine Echo Logistics looked bland enough to launder any particular sin. Cole felt anger like frostbite, first numb, then biting deeper with every line read. The evidence bag gulped the book whole, and both of them became heavier by law and by soul. Cameras sprouted on trees like late fruit, pointed at driveways and back doors, patient enough to watch men mistake secrecy for safety. Footsteps erased themselves even as they were made. The ridge wind told on everyone. By the time the SUV warmed, the ledger had already changed the future, rearranging warrants, testimonies, and the exact coordinates of sunrise for people who hadn't seen one in too long.
Rust grew like lichen along corrugated walls, and chemical dust wore a calendar no one signed. Rex's nose worked through absence until presence answered in wool, faint and human and stitched with initials. The scarf smelled like workdays that ended, like coffee in a cab, like a boy's hug on a front step. The badge beneath it had a date that matched a vanishing. Lauren cradled a foil-wrapped phone like a trapped confession, and Cole translated crates into ledger lines and routes into trauma. Off the record felt honest. On the record would later feel righteous. Trucks swore to weight they'd carried with tires and shocks. Men swore to nothing. Outside, the fence learned another gap, and wind memorized their names. Evidence does not resurrect, but it points. When they drove away, they took more than proof. They took the warehouse's last excuse for being a secret. Derek Vaughn arranged his desk the way surgeons arrange scalpels, certain of outcomes and unbothered by blood. He loved the elegance of silence more than money, because silence buys time at wholesale. A foster boy learned to turn hunger into leverage, and that boy grew into a man who collected people the way others collect cars. He wore black cashmere as if warmth were a right. Cameras winked on mountain roads. The ridge told him it had visitors. His enforcer waited without questions, because loyalty is cheaper when language is short. Derek preferred orders that walked by themselves. He believed fear should arrive before his name did. Somewhere, a boy's dog complicated a season's worth of planning, and that insult irritated him more than lawmen. The best empires fall from the smallest insistences. Tonight, it was fur, breath, and an animal's refusal to negotiate.
Tommy Ray cleaned a griddle as if confessions burned at the same temperature as bacon fat. The night regulars wanted refills and small mercies. The truckers wanted warmth that wasn't measured in miles. Outside, plows shed sparks like stubborn constellations. Tommy's cousin flew utility lines with a drone in curiosity. Between the two of them, Truth built a camera roll and waited for courage. The envelope spent 2 hours against Tommy's ribs, absorbing anxiety and black coffee. He recognized the look in Eli's posture because mirrors tell similar lies across decades. The decision felt smaller than it was, which is how good decisions happen. When the photos slid onto Ethan's desk, the room tipped toward justice. Tommy drove away under a sky that asked nothing and spared no one, relieved to be colder than his fear and proud in a way that had no audience. Some promises are currency, and some are flares. Eli walked until the snow turned every breath into a prayer he could see. The leash burned his palm into a reminder. The station's neon muttered the word open with a stutter that felt brave. He offered the only wealth he had to buy safety with a dog's life, misunderstanding that heroes do not take dogs, they partner with them. His mother's absence rode the wind the way scent rides memory. He named harm accurately in a town that prefers euphemism. The German shepherd stood like a thesis beside him,
All argument and no apology. Somewhere, a dispatcher's clock shrugged. Somewhere, a deputy's spine straightened. In the moment before doors swing, time always asks whether you want the world to remain familiar or become right. Eli chose right without vocabulary for it, and Winter took notice.
Combat taught Ethan Cole how to count differently, how to assign numbers to doors, distances, and hearts. The station tasted like stale coffee and old promises, and his badge felt heavier when children sat beneath clocks. His old canine bled through the memory long enough to make him kinder to the dog that wasn't his. Paperwork tried to behave like a solution. Databases tried to impersonate wisdom. Names repeated in ways that make patterns audible. The Marine in him measured angles. The deputy measured hope. He understood that proof and safety rarely arrive together, and the gap between them is where courage pays retail. He planned with maps and vengeance, both neatly folded. When the text arrived, the old counting returned. Minutes to ridge, seconds to breach, years stolen from a man who once answered to Dad. The math never balances. You act anyway. Training made Lauren Carter polite to terror and skeptical of certainty. Caseloads had taught her how bureaucracy breeds its own winters. She packed the gear because tools respect intention, and victims recognize competence faster than empathy. She recognized the ledger's handwriting as the tidy mask of someone who thinks order redeems cruelty. She logged chain of custody with the care of someone who refuses to give predators fresh footholds. In rooms where men posture, she conserved words and spent resolve. Her new county patch scratched her sleeve. Ambition scratched nothing. She wanted policies that left fewer boys on porches at midnight. When the blizzard pressed face first against the courthouse windows 2 days later, she spoke into microphones with a voice trained on lullabies and depositions, building a fund in a dead woman's name and daring the town to stay generous past the news cycle.
Donna Brooks kept the good mugs for nights that needed gentleness to pretend at ordinary. Grief had trimmed her house into usefulness, blankets folded where fear tends to sit, a porch light that outlived light bulbs. She measured courage by the boys who borrowed it and returned it in pieces. When tires whispered outside, her body remembered every shift where voices turned metallic. The kitchen knife felt lighter than the years demanded. She spoke to quiet rooms as if they were crowded with angels who owed her favors. After the retreating taillights surrendered to snow, she cried without sound so as not to frighten Eli, then made cocoa she never drank. Some heroes are built from stitched cardigans and notes stuck to refrigerators, and their battlefields are rented cabins where dogs are allowed on furniture because rules matter less than safety by morning. Jack Hanley respected dogs the way sailors respect storms. Violence had simplified his decisions for years, but animals complicate men who rely on momentum. The crowbar hung wrong in his grip when the bark vibrated glass. He understood spectacular arrests and careers, but bites and myths. The SUV idled like a choice. Retreat tasted like weakness and employment at the same time. The text that would later catch his boss at an airstrip had not yet been written into history. And for a night longer, Jack's loyalty could still pay his rent. Somewhere under his coat, a scar itched from a time a K9 taught him humility. He signaled withdrawal because legends make headlines, and he preferred rent. The line between cowardice and wisdom wears the same boots in winter. Men name it differently depending on whether they sleep well afterward.
Courthouses have climates that ignore seasons. The temporary command center smelled like printer toner, coffee, and adrenaline grating into exhaustion. Cameras sought faces to anchor their narratives. Microphones wanted an ending they could pronounce. Kathleen Monroe arranged exhibits with a pianist's precision, composing a chorus of ledger ink, drone footage, chain-linked names, and the sterile wrath of federal statutes. Michael Parker's hands shook around a mug. His voice would later teach strangers how captivity erases tense until you only speak present and prayer. Lauren's suit fit like intention. Ethan's uniform stood as punctuation to a sentence the town needed read aloud. Outside, snow softened edges into postcard mercy. Inside, mercy learned new teeth.
The indictment's language stacked like bricks. The charges carried their own weather. When Derek arrived in orange, charisma met fluorescent light and became smaller, the way all storms look smaller from after. Moving wounded hope uphill costs more than gravity admits. Snowmobiles waited like commas, promising breath between clauses. Holbrook's hand signals clipped the night into manageable shapes. Teens wrapped in blankets became weight that asked for patience and gave trust in return. Michael's legs remembered walking without permission and failed at it. Arms replaced them. Rex occupied the small space where panic tries to bloom, commanding stillness by mere existence. Engines wrote red punctuation across the white. Pursuit reconsidered ambition in weather that did not cooperate with ego. The ridge tried to close its mouth around them. The team became a sentence too stubborn to be swallowed. Somewhere downstream, paperwork rehearsed. Somewhere upstream, a cabin's bulb flickered and then admitted defeat. Extraction is the opposite of abandonment, performed in reverse, powered by breath clouds and promises you are not yet brave enough to fully say.
Summit Creek learned the difference between privacy and secrecy and found it preferred porches to fences. The bars served coffee to reporters who forgot their notes and remembered their humanity. The substation's radiator sang old songs in new keys. People who claimed to despise government watched paperwork save children and recalibrated belief without apology. Snowplows renamed themselves motorcades. The diner special acquired a hero's discount without announcement. Churches passed baskets for gasoline and therapy. Someone left a parka at the courthouse door with a note that read simply, "For later." The child who started it came to understand how communities unfold when given a clear job and a clock. When the helicopters left, the town did not return to before. It began a long middle, quieter than the raid and louder than the silence that it paid for all those winters. There is a moment when a working dog accepts ceremony as simply another task. The harness settled, the tag gleamed with official letters, and Rex blinked solemnly, then sought scent the way gravity seeks down. Children touched fur that had tasted gunpowder and fear, and their hands steadied. Ethan felt absurd pride he hid by talking about training schedules. The badge did not make the dog braver. It only informed strangers what Eli already knew. At the assembly, applause sounded like rain on a tin roof, and Rex sat through it as if patience were a command no one had to give. Later, back at the substation, he curled by the heater and dreamed paws flexing against tile, chasing none of it, keeping all of it. Some partners arrive through requisition, some arrive because boys refuse to barter love for safety, and fate agrees.
Names can become shelters. Grace Parker could no longer sign forms, but her name signed a fund that would outlast weather and news cycles. Lauren spoke of interventions measured in nights indoors, counselors paid on time, cell phones no longer shared between 3 staff, and background checks that finish before luck runs out. The town wrote checks in amounts that embarrassed pride and delighted spreadsheets. The fund's bylaws turned compassion into policy, proof against the decay that follows headlines. Eli stood off stage clutching a plaque he didn't feel he deserved, and Michael clapped with a gratitude that could not afford eloquence. Ethan remembered every intake form that landed at his desk like a prayer and felt the distance between emergency and infrastructure shrink by inches. The program began as a memorial and revealed itself as scaffolding for a different future. Derek Vaughn preferred exits that no one saw, vehicles that mumbled instead of bragged, and runways that learned discretion. The morning Missoula's horizon considered color, agents became geometry, boxing options until altitude was a rumor. Wealth had always been his weather. He dressed for it again and found it insufficient. Cuffs corrected posture the way consequences correct myth. His men measured loyalty until they discovered its exchange rate had plummeted overnight. The plane's wing could a lonely figure against frost. Ambition looked smaller, edged in ice. Derek learned a doctrine that criminals rarely accept.
logistics can be outflanked by the stubborn choreography of law and timing. When the sedan door shut, he became inventory, and the empire that bought silence discovered that silence, when purchased, refuses refunds. The sky took no notice. It has watched larger failures try to leave and fail gracefully.
Rescue without aftercare is a fancy word for relocation. Lauren built timelines around sleep, meals, and court dates, then draped them over kids who had learned to distrust calendars. Therapists measured progress in eye contact and snack choices. Schools argued over IEPs with a savagery that rang like hope. Apartments acquired locks that worked, and neighbors who minded their business. Michael learned to accept a mirror again, then a haircut, then laughter at the wrong moments that turned out to be the right ones. Eli discovered quiet that didn't feel like waiting for a key in a door. Ethan practiced not checking his phone every 2 minutes. Rex supervised all of it with the benevolent tyranny of a creature whose mission is to translate safety into routine. The town redrafted itself around these maps, making room without asking permission from the past. Night shifts invite memory. Ethan sometimes heard the bark that wasn't there, a phantom from another war, and would find his fingers at the scar where a leash once burned. He had promised a different dog, a different rescue that never arrived, and Montana snow felt too much like another country's dust. Rex did not heal that wound, he complicated it into usefulness. The job softened with purpose sharpened by names. He learned to sit with victories the way soldiers sit with loss, knowing both are rented. When he watched Eli move with less flinch, he allowed himself 6 seconds of unclenched jaw at the heater before returning to reports that refused to write themselves. Redemption in uniform looks like paperwork and dog fur on dress blues, and the knowledge that the next whiteout could be worse or kinder or both.
Captivity edits people into smaller fonts. Michael's first days free required sunglasses inside and patience with clocks. Muscles forgot their jobs. Hunger negotiated against habit. He spoke in short nouns and longer silences, as if verbs had to earn their places again. He practiced walking past doorways without bracing. He relearned the weight of his son's head on his shoulder, which turns out to be less than a chain and more than the world. He decorated slowly, choosing objects that did not owe any man a debt. He fed Rex first as a ritual, then alongside, then after, as trust recomposed hierarchy. Nightmares visited like relatives who do not call ahead. Daylight learned to answer the door. He carried shame the way burn victims carry weather, but the town insisted on naming him survivor until the word fit better than prisoner. Eli counted sleeps instead of miles, found safety in duplicates of ordinary things, and measured bravery by the number of rooms he could cross without checking shadows. School assemblies placed him under bright lights that felt like interrogations until applause taught him a different grammar. He learned the power of routine commands in a house that only gave kindness: sit, stay, eat, rest. He hid the plaque behind books and left the leash on a hook by the door, where it looked like readiness, not fear. He watched adults build systems around his story and decided to believe them a little at a time. He no longer rehearsed trades in his head. He no longer planned to barter the dog for a future. He owned both without negotiation, and winter began to look slightly less like a threat and slightly more like a season.
News cycles have a way of rewriting job descriptions. Jack saw his name inside sealed paperwork and practiced being elsewhere. He turned down the road that leads to fresh starts and found that it had tolls he couldn't afford. Violence had written muscle memory into him. Decency tried to annotate it with pen scratches. He considered a deal, then considered pride, and discovered pride prefers the company of poverty to the company of cages only until cages loom. Somewhere in an interview room, fluorescent light hummed a song about options. He remembered the bark and the windows shake and admitted quietly that the dog had been right and the night had been generous. Choosing survival over legend, he talked longer than he'd planned, and the empire lost another beam to a man who finally preferred sleep to stories men tell about themselves. Prison turns diamonds into currency you cannot spend. Derek cataloged assets like talismans against a system that prefers lists to legends. He replayed meetings where men admired his watch and pretended admiration meant immunity. Silence visited, this time unpurchased, and sat heavily where his charisma once paid the rent. Attorneys spoke in the future conditional, which is a grammatical way of admitting defeat politely. He learned the taste of institutional coffee and the arithmetic of rights reduced to ration. The memory of a German shepherd lurked like a punchline. He could not name the exact moment his weather changed, only that one boy's bargain and a town's appetite for decency outmaneuvered his scheduling. Empires do not fall to hurricanes, they fall to termites, ledgers, and dogs that choose men for reasons money never learns.
The recognition event felt like a small-town wedding without flowers, full of relieved tears, awkward suits, and a podium that had seen its share of bake sales. Ethan's commendation lived on a wall he barely looked at, but the speech mattered because civic rituals teach muscles how to hold gratitude. Lauren announced the fund, and the room's applause tried to become policy by force of volume. Michael stood in the back and measured oxygen against memory. Eli held Rex's harness and practiced standing still in bright rooms. Tommy accepted a certificate with the same hands that had washed dishes through the night, and he left early because the breakfast rush does not cancel itself. Ceremony does not fix history. It arranges it into a shape the future can recognize as belonging to the brave. Keys changed owners without ceremony, and a cedar-sided starter home learned new laughter. Donated pots clanged like bells. The wood stove introduced itself with crackle and promise. Michael walked from room to room like a man tasting words he had not spoken in years. Pantry, closet, window. Eli mapped spaces with a stick for Rex and a spot for homework, and a chair that would be the crying chair until it wasn't. Ethan lugged dog food as if it were sandbags, pretending utility to hide tenderness. The fence leaned from the last storm. Neighbors promised to fix it on Saturday without scheduling a committee. Homes rewrite biologies faster than therapy sometimes. The thermostat gained a superstition. The porch light gained a mission. Night approached and did not win. The door locked from inside and meant comfort instead of rehearsal.
Headline: Day's End. Maintenance begins. Court dates space themselves like dental appointments, annoying but necessary. Therapy carved grooves that made fresh water out of old rivers. Rex grew a little gray at the muzzle from new responsibilities and better sleep. Ethan learned to leave cases at the office 2 nights out of 5, which counts as progress in a county uniform. Lauren argued budgets into existence and swapped heels for boots when visits required dignity outside and warmth inside. Tommy bought a new drone and decided to film trout for fun. Donna took the good mugs down more often and drank from them herself. The town's weather kept practicing extremes, but the people inside it practiced temperance, which is the art of staying. The long middle never trends. It saves more lives than the raid ever could. Sunlight arrived without apology, flooding the valley in pinks that forgave no one because forgiveness wasn't required. Eli threw a stick and Rex wrote circles into new snow, tail flagging a nation of 2 + 1 when Michael joined. The courthouse bell tried for ceremony and landed on contentment. Ethan watched from the hood of a cruiser, cheeks stung by clean cold, and allowed the world to be uninteresting for 12 uninterrupted minutes. Lauren texted a photo of empty beds at the shelter and didn't need to use an exclamation point. Somewhere, a ledger gathered dust inside a sealed box, and somewhere else a certificate gathered it on a wall. The dog that refused barter patrolled a yard that did not require courage to cross. Winter still owned the mountains. It did not own the morning.